of Let's Talk Wildlife Conservation with Lydia, I have the privilege to host Dr. T.A. Adeyanju. Join me as I welcome Dr. T.A. Adeyanju. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Can we meet you, sir?
Yes, I'm Adeyanju, Adeni Tai, and I work here in the Department of Wildlife and Ecotourism Management. I began working here in 2012 November, and currently senior lecturer here. Focus, as you've mentioned, on wildlife conservation, specifically with ornithology. That's the study of wild birds, and it's my pleasure to give you the audience today.
All right, sir. Okay, I would like to ask, how did you find yourself in this field, seeing that it wasn't so pronounced some years back, unlike where it is now?
Well, I will say, my steps were directed by God. As far back as secondary school, I actually had interest in fauna, generally speaking. So I kept wild birds, which we normally call the feral pigeons, still in process of domestication, so you can still call them wild birds. I never knew that was what I was going to study, but I had a very strong passion for animals. I kept guinea pigs, kept rabbits. Of course, my parents did keep goats, but I wasn't so much interested with goats and poultry as of then. But I was very, very strongly attached with the birds. In fact, I never ate one single bird. And my birds happened to be one of the largest collection in the area where I lived, and everybody wanted to buy. And even at the point, I was just happy seeing them free with the large collections. But of course, my parents wanted me to enter into the business aspect of selling and actually having something to get back in terms of monetary value from keeping these animals. So that's where it started at that early age. And then after I finished secondary school, of course, going to university, I wanted to study veterinary medicine. That was the first course on my mind. My uncle then, who was my dad's elder brother, was a veterinary surgeon. And I would say that also pushed me to want to go into that field. But I already had a passion for animals anyway. And that was what I wanted to fill my jam for. But my dad wanted me to put in medicine. The night before I submitted, my dad altered it to read medicine. And when I wrote the jam, of course, I was given admission, but admission didn't fall possible for medicine or veterinary medicine. I had to go in for biological sciences. But will you have it, God still ordered my steps into one of the pioneer ornithologists in Nigeria, even in Africa, who is Professor Augustine Ezealo, who happened to be a very top lecturer then at the University, Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria. And at 300 level, we went on an excursion, and we happened to pick Aplory as one of the destinations for excursion. That was the first time I got to AP Leventis Ornithological Research Institute. And the passion immediately rubbed off then at 300 level. And then in 400 level, Professor Ezealo happened, I chose ornithology, and we're just about 4 who actually selected that course. At the end of the day, just 2 of us specialize in ornithology. And both of us are still in ornithology till today. And so Professor Ezealo, I will say, was professionally the one who actually pivoted my spiraling into ornithology since that time, 2003, 2004.
All right, sir. Thank you. So, from what you said, how that your parents wanted you to do medicine, and you actually didn't want to do that. Now, I actually also discovered that parents would actually want those big names: medicine, surgery, engineering, and things like that. And if you are doing anything related to biological science, it's almost like, what are you doing with your life?
Sure.
So, how do you think we can actually correct this notion? And what advice would you give to parents from your years of experience?
Well, I would strongly like to encourage and, of course, try to raise up the positive, from my own experience to parents, that education is not just about only the cognitive aspect of being able to, take back and report what the teacher gives to you. Basically, the students also have creative abilities. They have abilities to also make decisions and also learn, just like a baby, learning how to walk fall sometimes and be able to stand up. I had an experience where, as far back as 2011, we had an FAO sponsored expedition to Adeyanju wetlands, where we had initially we had 3 expatriates who came as consultants to help us in our sampling for wild bird capture. And these 3 young boys did not have a degree. They had just finished high school, and they were just in between high school and, of course, going to college. And they opted, actually from the age of 7, they had been attending ringing stations with their parents. So at this particular point, they had almost about 10 years experience already in ringing. And all of them were consultants. They were paid in dollars. They were even paid higher than we who had MSCs already, because at then I was already a graduate from Apple as far back as 2008. So I had an MSc. These boys did not have a degree. Neither did they have an MSc, but they were paid in dollars. So, but they had the skill. We couldn't take that away from them. So the skill is not just basically what rubs up on you when you go to get a degree. Really, hands-on experience is very, very vital, and that's something that's lacking in most institutions nowadays. Most of it is based, a lot of it is on theoretical basis, and so there's a need to encourage parents to, allow your children volunteer for things, even while they're in school. I know there are those students who are going to go into politics, there are students who want to go into arts, there are those who want to go into music. Of course, teach them at a young age to have a balance, and then allow them make their own mistakes. And of course, believing that they will stand up back on their toes. And of course, if we didn't have the likes of Wole Soyinka, who is of course a Nobel laureate today, even with a degree of a third or so-called third class, but he's still mentoring professors all around the world today. So I think there's that inspiring act. If you look into China and the economy currently, it's not just built by those who have degrees. Basically by people who have learned skills in their hands, creative people, business-minded people. And I think that's something that you should take home, in that the experience you have cannot be taken away from you. Certificates, you can even forget about them, isn't it? But what you know, anytime you're called, even waking up from the bed, you'll be able to do it again and again and again.
All right, thank you, sir. So how then can we integrate this into the education system, especially for the younger folks?
Well, the education system, ASU, which is of course the academic staff in universities, is of course trying its best. And there's this loggerhead between the education and labor ministry and that of the ASU and other, like we will say, academic staff of various institutions, both in the education and technical institutions in Nigeria. But we'll get to that balance very soon, definitely. Education is not cheap. Experience is also not cheap. And that's one reason why volunteering is something, if you look at the way the academia is programmed in Europe and developed parts of the world, you see that there's a lot of volunteering. And this is offering your service or offering your time for possibly not even getting anything back in return. But that experience on a platter of gold can take you where degrees currently being awarded can't take you. So at the end of having a volunteer and an experience of course, at reputable institutions, people will be able to give you references in future. They'll be able to link you up. Oh, that particular guy is very good in social area. He had a spar with us for about 5 months or 3 months and thereabout. And I'm sure he's capable of doing this, having gotten a degree or having gone to take up his studies. So it's very, very, very important that we need to encourage our students. Many students have graduated from our universities in the past without having volunteered after a 5-year whole program in a degree awarding institution. Now you begin to wonder, what does this student know in that particular field? Because the practical experience is when you are on the field. There's very little time, of course, when lecturers are teaching, because they are busy, teaching undergraduates, teaching postgraduates, and the program is entirely sandwiched, and even the lecturers themselves don't even have time to go out and take a break. So it's very important students take out time, their holidays, convert them into time to be able to serve in institutions where they need to build up skills, which are very, very important to populate their CVs.
All right. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
Okay, that implies that we'd have more volunteering opportunities for students,
Yes.
right? And I think that World of Wildlife is such that you actually approve, we go on field, on-site experience, and that also has been reason for institutions such as the Ibadan Bird Club, which I know that you're a member of. So would you like to share some of the things you get to do? And also, I know that you instituted the University of Ibadan Bird Club, which is in view of raising awareness about birds in
Yes.
Ibadan. So can you just talk about that?
Yes, the Ibadan Bird Club is an experience that has dated over a decade now. I know at a particular time, Bumi Jegede, who was with the NCF, came about and wanted something that was a mirror image of the Lekki Bird Club in Lagos to be kick-started, and that was when this was initiated. Denny Ban was then manager IT Forest Center, and of course we came to Department of Wildlife to actually inaugurate Ibadan Bird Club, and we then went back to IT to do some bird viewing. So it's been a very good history, especially because we can bring in citizen science, we can bring in people who are laymen who have not actually professionally studied wildlife or zoology or any course that is close to this, and they just have a passion for viewing wildlife. And then there can be that rub-off. For example, I as one individual cannot be in two places at the same time, but if I'm able to build more people who have that capacity and who are able to volunteer their time once a month to go out sighting birds, the knowledge of people and awareness of people who know birds will improve drastically. The IBC actually has two categories of people: the adults and of course very, very young age of students in primary and of course primary schools, and sometimes even before primary schools. So we can see that same experience that I told you of those boys who came from Europe as consultants, even without having a degree. So they continue this, or they start this at an age of 7. By the time they're 14, even before finishing their secondary schools, you can imagine the amount of experience they already have about nature, and this will actually influence their choices of life in future. And of course, that is what we believe strongly that IBC can do.
13th of May this year, we celebrated the World Migratory Birds.
Yes.
And that is in view of actually celebrating also the birds that live around us.
True.
And also migratory birds that come from different parts of the world to actually breed at different points in time.
Yes.
Now, so the focus of this celebration for this year was actually on water and the importance of water to migratory birds. So I would like to share your experience about migratory birds generally in Nigeria. So how do you think we can actually have a win-win situation also, such that we can balance the pressure of pressure for food and space for development, and also conservation of birds in Nigeria?
Well, that's a tough one. Currently, we have what is called the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, number 1 and 2 there is zero poverty, and of course, we're trying to fight hunger, zero hunger, and no poverty. And those are what we say objectives that are very difficult to actually reach. But of course, that is where United Nations wants governments today to focus on as priorities. And we can't take away from the fact that there's no ecosystem on the planet Earth that has not been tampered with. Before, some 30 years ago, we used to talk about pristine habitats or pristine ecosystems, but today, confidently say there's no ecosystem that is pristine anymore. It's all been tampered with. Of course, climate change already tells us that effects from all the way from Europe, from China, gas flaring all around the country is affecting even communities where they do not such gas flaring or no such carbon footprints being expressed on the ecosystem. So, but when it comes to poverty, what we need to think about is what are the alternatives, and how can we ensure that through conservation of wild birds and their ecosystems where they develop, where they depend upon as stopover sites, these people can have alternative sources of livelihood. One of the main challenges of stopover sites in water bodies is that birds stop over to drink because they have to move very, very long distances depending on the choices of those birds, whether to go on a direct flight or to stop at intervals. So when they stop over, a lot of people who are hungry, of course, set up nets along those flight paths and trap thousands of birds, of course, which are dried and sold at peanuts. But if it's one of the ways of trying to curb bees, of course, is improving awareness. Even when people are hungry, if they have the right culture and the right values, they will still have a rethink about the number of birds that they catch and the damage that they're causing to the ecosystem. Many of these birds will have ecosystem services that they offer in their home countries or in countries where they are resident. But of course, when their populations are decimated, they will no longer be able to contribute such ecosystem services. They won't be able to be sighted by the next generation if their populations, of course, goes down below it's what is convenient now to sight regularly. But when birds become very rare, they now become birds that what do we call it now? Not even occasional, very hard to see. For example, the Ibadan Malimbe, which we know is present in Ibadan, but this year, 2023, I have not sighted that bird. So it's unlike a bird that you sight almost every day, and of course you're happy that this bird is still alive. So many of our birds will become rare and endangered, and I don't think that's the path we want to go. So alternatives. What are the alternatives that we get from birds? Okay, today we have so many birds, of course, that have been domesticated. And one, of course, that a lot of people eat, the francolins and stuff. A number of birds species belong to the francolin group or family that can be domesticated and, of course, serve as a source of protein for rural areas and also urban areas. If you go along these roads today, birds serve as one of the most common offered delicacy that serves as bushmeat. They are conspicuous and there's actually no ecosystem that you can't find them. And then for migratory birds, we have so many of them. We have the gardenies, we have so many of the waterfowls that we find. If you have the chance to visit Adeyanju wetlands, you'll be delighted to see the number of things that many of us don't see these birds where we live. But if we can take a short visit, of course, if there can be peace also in the northeast, that people will be able to take out time and be guaranteed of their safety to move from Ibadan through Abuja all the way through the plateau and be able to get up north to Adeyanju wetlands, then it's something that is synonymous to an experience that you have in national parks outside the country, right here within us. And of course, there's a lot of revenue that will be generated. There's a lot of provision that will be offered. People will be able to sell their items, they'll be able to purchase, and so it's going to be a win-win approach. People have an alternative in terms that they will have alternative livelihoods that they can support. Creative ventures, bracelets, potteries can be, that are fabricated all the way indigenously, can be sold. And I know a lot of tourist visitors will want to purchase many of those to bring back home as a sign that they visited these places.
Alright, okay, so that means that we're talking also about development of ecotourism potentials in Nigeria.
Yes.
Using birds as that point to sell what we have. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, how can we integrate that particular idea into the regular citizen that just lives in Nigeria and knows that, okay, I cut the trees, I have water pond and things like that. So how can we begin to integrate that into our daily living?
Well, that's basically that's restoration ecology, and of course in urban areas, restoring forests in urban spaces. It's something that is very much needed as we begin to grow a lot of our suburbs into urban areas. So it's part of urban planning. I think every state in Nigeria needs to have a green plan for their states. There are places that have been left, that have been cut out as setbacks that are supposed to be greened. They're supposed to be left green, and there are supposed to be green areas also, even within communities, that are just supposed to be left bare to provide us with fresh air, to serve as flood controls, isn't it? And to serve as habitat for wild animals. But a lot of these currently are being turned around, being sold, and being turned into estates, which I think is a top priority for governments to begin to frown out, because the life of man is dependent on how quality and pure his ecosystem is. And so if we remove all the plants that provide for us carbon dioxide, we will then need to start buying oxygen in the very many years to come. There's a prediction that by 2050 we're going to need 2 planet Earths to support the growth, the current population of the world. So Ibadan, we're going to hit or exceed 10 billion people on planet Earth. I don't know what's going to happen, but of course resources seem to be static, but the population is still growing. That means there's going to be competition for food, because we won't have enough space to grow our crops anymore. Maybe we need to go to mass or to begin to cultivate crops. So it's a problem that is not yet resolved, and turning aviatourism or turning around birds ecology into aviatourism industry is something that is going to be a very good alternative that we need at the moment. Currently, Ibadan, just like you mentioned, is a project that started far back as 2018, 2019. And we began by using indigenous trees to replant watershed around Ibadan. And if you go there currently now, most of those trees are as tall as almost 2-story buildings. So I've always heard in the past that many of our indigenous trees are incapable of growing fast. But of course, because of that fact and because of that evidence, we now know that it's not true. Our indigenous trees are also capable of growing very, very, very fast. And if we're going to encourage more of this, then there's a future for urban restoration or urban forest restoration. A lot of indigenous trees that we planted have done very, 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 very well, and we say that we're impressed. So these trees, when they grow, of course, they're going to serve as habitats for wildlife. Birds will have places to nest, isn't it? Many of our birds are very specific or very specialized in the type of trees that they use to nest. Not only birds are only an indicator for the entirety of other wildlife. Bats are also there, which are mammals, and several other herbivores will not be found in areas without good cover. So we find out that some birds are specialists. Without very good forest cover, you never sight those bird species there. So as we try to increase many areas with lots of canopy cover or with lots of wooded areas, then we find out that those animals will be encouraged to thrive. So that's one thing that we need to keep on encouraging around or reproducing all around about us.
Okay. And lastly, I'd like to ask, what's the role of culture in bird conservation? Because I know that prior to me studying wildlife, the thought I had is when you have a bird, it's either associated with witches and wizards. I mean, that's a superstition actually. And I've discovered that because of knowledge I've had, I really am not afraid of those. I'm not afraid of seeing birds or even relating with them. You know, I had a recent experience just this weekend where my sister told me that she found bats in the room and she had to call me how she was going to remove the bats. I'm like, okay, they're not harmful, like she just mentioned COVID. And that's because there's been that impression that these birds are associated with something. So how do you think we can change this perspective, and what do you think are the myths which has prevailed over the years?
Well, in terms of culture, that's a completely different study entirely, but culture is very interesting in terms that, just like I mentioned, almost every bird, for example, in Yoruba culture, almost every bird, for example, the Malimbes, they call it Apalorun, or they have different names for specific birds. Sometimes they do generalize because, of course, among the Malimbes, we have the red-vented, the red-headed, the Ibadan Malimbe, crested, isn't it? So quite different types of Malimbes do occur out there in the field. But very, very important for culture that we can use culture as a leverage in terms of use. Many of these birds have their cultural uses and cultural interpretations. For example, the blackbirds, generally, or even we call it religiously, they are often associated with evil. So, but are birds actually evil? I've held so many blackbirds in my hand, and I've not turned to an evil genius. So they're just basically opinions that have grown with such faiths or such ethnicities from time immemorial. For example, I know that in some of the Eastern Nigeria cultures, if you hear an owl calling in the evening, it's negative interpretation, possibly that your one of your in-laws has died or stuff, and so people really don't want to hear such an animal, or just sighting an animal and they begin to feel, oh, your ancestor is appearing to you, that your time has come. So things like that, and people keep on passing such from one generation to the other. I've held owls in my hand and I'm still alive and doing well. So such notions have even helped us to preserve some birds, because some birds are called sacred. In fact, many of the white birds among our cultures today, they are termed sacred because they are white, and people associate them with purity. For example, I know in the Christian faith, the white dove represents the Holy Spirit. So that's just how some of those religious sects have grown from time immemorial. Of course, not all birds are white, and some specific birds, even though they are white, but they're still very, very dirty. Okay, so it's the same thing. We also have some birds that are called, for example, the Jesus bird, the Actolophinus jacana, which is called the African jacana. The bird that is said actually doesn't walk on water, but just mimics that same theme. Then, in terms of use, medicinally, some of these birds also have their medicinal uses. Some birds that sing, it is believed that if you kill that bird and eat it, the person who is going to eat the food is going to be able to sing very well. But the issue now is, have this been studied, and is there some factual basis for making such assertions? For example, if you look at among the bird groups, the parrots, it was very, very good in mimics. You look at the chats, they're also very good in songs. But you can eat 20 of that bird and still have the same type of voice. But maybe a few people who originally were good at singing ate them, and people now took it up. That's a magical formula for being able to sing properly. So many of the birds today are killed and hunted. For example, I had an experience when I was in the Omo Forest Reserve where we interacted with hunters, and we told them that we don't shoot with guns, we shoot with our cameras. And of course, that was one way of trying to bring them closer, because they would see a hornbill, and you imagine that the amount of meat in the hornbill is not as heavy as 0.5 kg. This bottle of water is heavier than 0.5 kg. So, but they will shoot that bird, and the cartridge they actually used to shoot that bird, for me, is almost the same. Of course, the cartridge is quite expensive nowadays. So, but you begin to wonder, is it that? I begin to ask them, is it that the number of these birds is declining in the field, or why is it that you have to go for a hornbill rather than going for an antelope or a doika? So these are some of the problems. Wildlife, as in terms of populations are declining, and so birds is falling as the last thing that people can hunt out there. So it's a platform that we need to use. We can go and blow all the grammar, write all the theses and all the articles that we want. They're all on the shelf. But if we do not translate these into cultures, we don't translate into knowledge that can be used to change attitudes, perceptions out there in the rural areas where a lot of these birds still occur, then we will not have succeeded.
Okay, we have the gaming session, and this session is basically going to be in relation to review.
Okay.
Right? So tell us your 10 favorite birds.
Well, I don't have favorite birds. For me, every bird I come across is unique in its own, because studying their ecology. In Europe, they have a different sense of thought when it comes to birds. In terms of, they've studied almost all that they have, and even the bird flicking its tail becomes something important that someone can take up as a PhD thesis. Of course, it will not be something very well marketable in Nigeria of our setting, because it's a country that is still developing, and people will put more interest in birds that are either endangered or rare or flagships. And so, of course, some of the flagship birds that I would like to see that I have not seen very much, of course, those are birds that we only find in the southeastern part of this country, which I happen not to have visited in my lifetime. So most of the birds that you find there are birds that I really want to go see. And among those birds, of course, one of the malimbis, which is the yellow, one of the yellow malimbis that you have there, which is actually endangered, and that's one of the birds I would like to see. And apart from that, we also have one of other, I don't know why they're all endangered anyway, but they have.
So I think we're done. We would like you to have a closing remark. So.
Well, do I have a closing remark? But of course, the point is that you lastly raised about interpreting books in local dialects. I think it's very, very it comes in at a very, very good time, because printing or publishing books are quite expensive to do. When we published the Common Birds of IT as far back as 2013, we published it at about averagely $4 a copy, and then $1 was about roughly 150 naira. So the book then cost about 600 naira to produce, and even then we're still struggling to get funding. So, but of course we know that the dollar rate has increased, and that same book we produced in 2013, 10 years to come now, and the value of dollars now is going to be worth 3,000 naira a copy. And of course many of our students, even in our high institutions, are not willing to pay or let go of 3,000 naira. But I believe with funding, we should be able to give these books for free in some of these communities if we do interpret them, which is something I will take up as a task after this interview. And of course, look into how we can produce it. Of course, the major language in this side of the country is Yoruba. So we will work towards doing something like that in Yoruba. Something like that has been done at IT already for indigenous trees and nurseries and medicinal plants. So I think it's also welcome that we do something. I already have it on my mind, because somebody recently also challenged me on why we cannot get the names of these birds in our local dialect. So I'll take it up as a challenge. Thank you.
So that means that an offshoot of this conversation is that we're waiting for a publication by you where we have our wild birds in Yoruba.
Yeah.
All right, sir. All right, thank you so much, sir, for your time. We're grateful. On behalf of everyone, by saying through, we are grateful for your time.
It's a pleasure.
That privilege you've given to us to share your experience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you too.